I sat in a hard wooden chair in Cook County Probate Court, wearing my only decent blazer. My parents slid a single piece of paper across the defense table and told me to sign it. They said my late Aunt Clara left behind a mountain of debt, and this legal waiver would protect me from her creditors. I signed it because I had no reason to doubt them. The hearing lasted exactly 4 minutes. Then Judge Thomas Sterling tapped his pen against the oak desk, adjusted his glasses, and ordered my parents to step out into the hallway. He looked at me and asked a question that made the floor drop out from under me. Before I tell you what the judge said that morning, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe the truth always comes to light. Drop a comment letting me know what city you are listening from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to that courtroom where my family tried to bury me. My name is Chloe Evans. I am 30 years old, working as a freelance graphic designer and barely keeping up with my rent. Sitting in that courtroom, the contrast between my family and me was impossible to ignore. The cuffs of my blazer were visibly frayed. My father Richard wore a tailored Tom Ford suit, while my mother Patricia rested her hands on a pristine Birkin bag. They carried an air of wealth and unbothered confidence. I just felt like I was trespassing in a world I did not belong to. A week prior, they called me with the news about Aunt Clara. Clara was my mother's estranged sister, and the only person in our bloodline who ever treated me with genuine kindness. When Richard and Patricia funneled every spare dollar into sending my younger sister Madison to study overseas, Clara quietly paid my community college tuition. Now she was gone. My parents claimed she died penniless. They insisted I needed to sign a waiver of notice to distance myself from the financial wreckage she left behind. I could not afford a lawyer to review the paperwork. I simply took the pen they handed me and signed on the dotted line. The courtroom remained quiet. Judge Thomas Sterling flipped through the thick probate file. 1 page, 2 pages. He paused at page 3. The rhythmic tapping of his pen against the solid oak bench echoed across the high ceiling. He lowered his reading glasses and locked his gaze on my parents. His voice carried the kind of quiet authority that makes people hold their breath. Mr. and Mrs. Evans, I need you both to step out into the hallway immediately. My mother opened her mouth to argue, but the bailiff took a step forward. Richard grabbed her arm and quickly guided her out. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind them, leaving me alone with the judge. Sterling turned his attention back to me. The sternness in his face faded into a look of sharp calculation. Miss Evans, he said, measuring every syllable, are you aware that you just signed away your legal rights to a coastal estate and an irrevocable trust fund valued at $4.2 million? The air left my lungs. The room blurred. $4.2 million. A beachfront estate. My parents did not bring me here to shield me from debt. They brought me here to steal my inheritance right under a judge's nose. They assumed I was too poor and too naive to ask questions, but they made one fatal mistake. They assumed the judge would not ask questions either. I pushed through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the corridor. The polished brass handle felt cold against my damp palm. In my other hand, I gripped the copy of the estate summary Judge Sterling had just handed me. The paper was already crumpling under the pressure of my fingers. $4.2 million, a beachfront property, an irrevocable trust. The words echoed in my head, competing with the thud of my boots against the marble floor. I needed to reach the elevators. I needed air. But my parents had no intention of letting me walk away. Richard and Patricia stepped out from an alcove near the restrooms. They moved in perfect synchronization, physically blocking my path to the elevator bank. There was no guilt in their posture. No shame for getting caught attempting to defraud their own daughter inside a federal building. There was only raw, unvarnished malice. Patricia lunged forward first. Her manicured fingers clamped around my wrist like a vice. Her acrylic nails dug into my skin through the thin fabric of my blazer. "What did you say to that judge?" My mother hissed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper so the passing clerks would not hear. I wrenched my arm free. The sudden movement caught her off guard, causing her to stumble back half a step. I held up the printed summary, shoving the stark numbers right into their line of sight. $4.2 million. I kept my voice steady, refusing to let them hear the rapid hammering in my chest. You brought me here to steal everything Clara left me just so you could pay off those drowning shell companies you run. I expected denial. I expected my father to feign ignorance, to blame a clerical error, to play the victim of a broken legal system. Instead, Richard let out a short, hollow laugh. He adjusted the lapel of his tailored suit and took a slow step closer, crowding me against the limestone wall of the corridor. He looked down at me, his eyes dark and calculating, devoid of any paternal warmth. "You really think you can play in this league, Chloe?" His voice was smooth, carrying the exact same cadence he used to intimidate contractors and bank loan officers. "You are a freelance graphic designer who cannot even keep up with your credit card minimums. You buy your clothes off clearance racks and panic over rent on the first of every month. Your electricity was shut off last October. Do you honestly believe you have the financial stamina to survive a probate battle against my attorneys?" He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a neatly folded document. He held it out like a peace offering, but I knew it was a trap. "Sign this error correction form right now," Richard commanded. "It tells the judge you misunderstood the waiver and reaffirms your intent to step away from the estate entirely. Do that, and I will wire $20,000 to your checking account before dinner. Consider it a generous gift. $20,000, a fraction of what Clara actually left me." He offered it with a straight face, genuinely believing my current poverty made me desperate enough to take the bait. He looked at me not as a daughter, but as a minor liability that could be settled with pocket change. My mind flashed back to Aunt Clara. When I was 19, facing eviction because Richard cut off my college funds to buy Madison a brand new luxury sedan for her study abroad program, Clara was the one who sent a cashier's check. She did not ask for a thank you. She did not hold it over my head. She just told me to finish my degree. She saw how my parents intentionally starved me of resources to keep me compliant and dependent. Clara left me this trust because she knew it was the only way I would ever be free of their control. I looked from the paper to my father's expectant face. Then I looked at my mother. Patricia was adjusting her designer watch, letting out an exaggerated sigh, looking annoyed that I was taking too long to surrender. I snatched the error correction form from Richard's hand. For a split second, a smug smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He thought I was giving in. He thought his intimidation tactic worked. Instead, I gripped the top edge of the thick legal paper and tore it straight down the middle. The sound of the paper ripping echoed sharply in the quiet corridor. I stacked the two halves, tore them again, and let the pieces flutter to the marble floor, raining down over his polished Italian leather shoes. "See you in court, Mr. Evans." The satisfaction of that moment was a rush of pure adrenaline. For the first time in 30 years, I stood up to the two people who spent my entire life shrinking my existence. I pushed past my father, hitting the down button on the elevator panel. The metal doors slid open. I stepped inside, turned around, and maintained dead eye contact with them as the doors closed. Their faces were carved from stone. They did not shout. They did not pound on the doors. They just stood in the hallway and watched me disappear. As the elevator began its descent to the ground floor, I let out a long, shaky breath. I leaned the back of my head against the mirrored wall, trying to process the magnitude of the war I just started. I needed a lawyer, a ruthless, expensive probate litigator. I figured I could use the estate summary to secure a loan. I could take the document to a reputable bank, show them the judge's confirmation of the trust, and get an advance to fight my parents in court. I finally had leverage. I had a legitimate path forward. Then my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a text from my landlord demanding this month's rent. Instead, it was an automated alert from Chase Bank. The notification on my lock screen was stark and brief. "Account ending in 4309 has been locked. Action required immediately." My stomach dropped. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I tapped the notification, forcing my banking app to open. A harsh red banner stretched across the top of the screen. "Available balance $0. A secondary message popped up beneath it stating that a legal hold had been placed on my funds due to a disputed asset freeze. My breath caught in my throat. I dialed the customer service number on the back of my debit card, my fingers trembling so badly I almost dropped the device. The automated system transferred me to a fraud representative. When I demanded to know why my money was gone, the representative read a dry corporate note from my file. Ma'am, our legal department received an emergency court order this morning filed by the primary account holders of your joint college checking account. They claimed potential elder financial abuse regarding an ongoing probate case and requested a freeze on all connected assets to prevent capital flight. The line went silent. I did not bother arguing with the representative. I ended the call. I had forgotten. When I was 18, entering community college, Richard insisted on co-signing my first checking account to help me build credit. I never removed his name. I never thought I had to. While I was sitting in the courtroom listening to Judge Sterling, my father's legal team was already filing an emergency motion to choke off my only supply of cash. They did not just want to steal Clara's money. They wanted to paralyze me before I even realized we were at war. The elevator chimed, and the doors opened to the busy lobby of the courthouse. I stepped out into the crowd of shuffling lawyers, security guards, and anxious clients. I had no money for the bus fare home. I had no money to print legal documents. I had no money for dinner. I stood in the center of the lobby, gripping the copy of the estate summary. My parents struck the first strategic blow, cutting off my air supply with clinical precision, but they made an error in judgment. They left me backed into a corner, and people with nothing left to lose are the most dangerous ones to fight. I zipped up my worn jacket and walked toward the heavy glass exit doors, stepping out into the biting Chicago wind. I needed to figure out my next move immediately. I looked up to see a sleek black vehicle already pulling up to the curb, ready to deliver their next threat. The biting Chicago wind whipped across the concrete plaza outside the courthouse. I pulled the collar of my wool coat tighter around my neck. The coat belonged to Aunt Clara. It still carried a faint trace of her lavender perfume mixed with the scent of old paper. I wore it today to feel a sense of protection, a quiet reminder of the only woman who ever treated me like I mattered. After discovering my bank account had been locked by my own parents, the fabric felt like the only shield I had left against a world actively trying to crush me. Before I could take another step toward the bus stop, a sleek black Range Rover swerved sharply toward the curb. The heavy tires ground against the pavement, cutting off the pedestrian crosswalk and forcing me to stop in my tracks. The engine idled with a low, menacing hum. The passenger side window glided down. Sitting in the heated leather seat was my younger sister, Madison. She lowered her Prada sunglasses, resting them on the bridge of her nose. Her perfect blonde blowout remained untouched by the freezing wind outside. At 27, Madison had never filled out a job application. While I spent my early 20s juggling freelance design gigs and waiting tables to keep my electricity running, Madison hopped between European vacations and luxury shopping sprees, entirely funded by Richard and Patricia. She was the golden child, insulated from consequence, raised to view my struggles as a character flaw, rather than the result of a rigged family system. The driver door opened. Marcus Cole stepped out onto the sidewalk. Marcus was my brother-in-law. At 32, he was already a managing director at a top-tier Wall Street investment bank. He was a tall African-American man who carried himself with the calculated arrogance of someone who destroyed companies for a living. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my annual rent. He adjusted his silk tie, his posture radiating authority and disdain. Marcus did not just manage portfolios, he orchestrated hostile takeovers. Now he was bringing that exact corporate hostility to a family dispute on a public sidewalk. He walked around the hood of the vehicle, his leather shoes clicking against the pavement. He did not offer a greeting. He did not ask how I was doing. He stopped 2 feet in front of me and lifted a thick manila envelope. Without a word of warning, he tossed it directly at my chest. The heavy package struck my collarbone and dropped to the concrete landing near the tips of my scuffed boots. Defamation and extortion. Marcus said, his voice smooth, practiced, and dripping with lethal intent. I looked down at the envelope, then back up at his face. I did not move to pick it up. Your parents authorized my firm to take over this little probate issue. Marcus continued, slipping his hands into his trouser pockets. You made a grave error in that courtroom today, Chloe. You think because some bleeding heart judge paused a hearing, you have a winning hand. You do not. My legal team filed a civil suit against you 10 minutes ago. We are claiming you are attempting to extort the estate through fraudulent claims and defaming Richard Evans in a public forum." He leaned in closer. The scent of his expensive cologne masked the exhaust fumes from the street. "I know you have $0 in your checking account," Marcus said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "I know your credit is maxed out. My firm employs dozens of litigators who bill at $1,000 an hour. We will drown you in discovery motions, depositions, and procedural delays. We will sue you until you cannot afford a cup of instant ramen. We will bury you in so much legal debt that your grandchildren will be paying it off." He gestured toward the envelope on the ground with a nod of his head. "The documents inside offer you one final exit strategy," he told me. "It is an updated waiver relinquishing your claim to Clara's trust. Sign it. Drop this crusade. If you refuse, the lawsuit moves forward and you will be homeless by the weekend. I will make sure no landlord in this city ever approves your background check again." From the passenger seat, Madison let out an exaggerated sigh. She leaned her head out the window, looking at me as if I were a stray dog begging for scraps. "Stop making a fool of yourself, Chloe," she called out, her voice dripping with condescension. "You are embarrassing the family. You cannot beat Marcus. He destroys actual billionaires before lunch. Just sign the paper and go back to your little drawing cartoons. Maybe Mom will send you a grocery gift card if you behave." I stood motionless on the freezing sidewalk. The cold wind bit into my cheeks, but the chill spreading through my veins had nothing to do with the weather. I looked at Madison draped in unearned luxury, and then at Marcus weaponizing his corporate power to crush a civilian. A sudden realization clicked into place. Marcus was an investment banker. He dealt in high-yield corporate mergers and international capital. He did not waste his time running errands for his father-in-law. He certainly did not deploy his firm's elite legal team over a simple family inheritance dispute, unless his own money was on the line. Richard ran several failing shell companies. If Marcus was this desperate to secure Clara's $4.2 million trust, it meant Marcus was financially entangled in Richard's mess. They were not just greedy. They were trying to cover up a massive financial bleed. I slowly bent my knees, keeping my eyes locked on Marcus the entire time. I picked up the heavy manila envelope from the concrete. The paper was cold. I tapped the edge of the envelope against my palm, straightening it with deliberate slowness. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break under their display of power. Instead, I offered Marcus a hollow, detached smile. "We will see about that," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, dangerous calm. Marcus narrowed his eyes. The smirk vanished from his face. He expected me to panic, to beg, to burst into tears at the threat of financial ruin. My eerie composure unsettled him. He stared at me for a long second, trying to decipher my reaction, before he turned on his heel and walked back to the driver's side of the Range Rover. Madison rolled her window up in disgust. The heavy doors slammed shut, and the luxury SUV accelerated away from the curb, merging aggressively into the downtown traffic. I stood alone on the pavement, the roar of the city returning to my ears. The threat was real. Marcus had the resources to follow through on every single word. I was entirely cut off from my own money, facing a mountain of fabricated lawsuits and standing miles away from my apartment without bus fare. I shoved my bare hands deep into the pockets of Aunt Clara's old coat to escape the biting wind. The thick wool offered immediate warmth. I closed my eyes, trying to regulate my breathing, trying to figure out how I could possibly fight a Wall Street firm with empty pockets. As my right hand dug deeper into the pocket, my thumb brushed against a frayed edge in the lining. It was a small, hidden tear near the bottom seam, an intentional separation in the heavy fabric. I pushed my index finger through the opening. The lining gave way, revealing a tiny, hidden pocket sewn between the layers of the coat. My breath caught in my throat. I slipped 2 fingers inside the concealed pouch. My fingertips grazed something hard and metallic. I pulled my hand out of the pocket and opened my palm. Sitting right in the center of my hand was a small brass key. The metal was cold jagged along one edge and undeniably specific. Stamped clearly across the flat top of the brass was the logo for Chase Bank. Beneath the logo was a distinct 4-digit serial number. It was a safe deposit box key. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden surge of adrenaline washing away the cold. Clara knew. She knew Richard and Patricia would try to intercept the estate. She knew they would lock me out of my accounts and try to starve me into submission. She planned for this exact moment. She wore this coat every single winter, and she left the key waiting for me inside the lining. Marcus thought he won the financial war by freezing my checking account. He had no idea that Clara handed me the keys to a different vault entirely. The real battle was just beginning. I gripped the brass key tight in my fist, turned my collar up against the wind, and started the long walk back to my apartment. I needed to see what else they were hiding. The walk from downtown Chicago to my suburban apartment took nearly 3 hours. The transit authority scanner had blinked red when I tried to swipe my pass at the station, confirming my parents had successfully weaponized their legal freeze across every single account tied to my name. I navigated the freezing pavement on foot. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through my jeans and stung my face, but the heavy wool of Clara's vintage coat shielded my core. My right hand remained buried deep inside the hidden pocket, my fingers tracing the jagged teeth of the brass bank key. That small piece of metal was my anchor. It grounded me while the rest of my reality fractured. I lived in a deteriorating walk-up complex on the outskirts of the city. The rent was cheap, the heating was unreliable, and the neighbors kept to themselves. It was a far cry from the gated properties and manicured lawns of my family, but it was mine. I paid for it with late nights, hunched over a drawing tablet, designing logos and marketing materials for local businesses. It was a humble existence, yet it belonged entirely to me, untainted by Richard and Patricia. My worn boots echoed against the metal staircase as I climbed to the second floor. My muscles ached from the grueling trek. I reached into my bag for my apartment keys, craving nothing more than a hot shower and a moment to strategize. I stopped dead on the landing. The deadbolt on my front door was disfigured. Deep silver scratches gouged the cheap brass plating, and the wooden doorframe was splintered near the strike plate. A draft of cold hallway air blew past my ankles, and the door creaked inward by a fraction of an inch. A fresh wave of adrenaline flushed the exhaustion out of my system. I pressed my palm against the chipped wood and pushed the door open. The devastation inside stole my breath. My sanctuary had been shredded. The perpetrators did not just search the apartment, they dismantled it. My small living room couch was flipped upside down, the cheap fabric underside slashed open, spilling yellow foam across the scuffed hardwood floor. My bookshelf had been swept clear. Hundreds of design books, novels, and reference materials lay in a chaotic heap, their spines broken and pages crumpled. I stepped cautiously over the threshold, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I moved toward the bedroom, my eyes scanning the wreckage. The mattress was dragged off the box spring and gutted. My clothes were yanked from the closet and scattered like rags. The framed photographs I kept on my nightstand, mostly pictures of Clara and me during my teenage years, had been smashed. Shards of glass glittered under the dim glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds. They had even targeted my workspace. My drafting table was overturned. Stacks of printed invoices, client briefs, and tax returns were strewn everywhere. They were searching for a paper trail. They were looking for offshore account numbers, hidden deeds, or safe deposit box leases. A profound, icy rage replaced the initial shock. This was not a random burglary. A street thief would have taken my computer monitor or the small television mounted on the wall. Both electronics sat untouched amid the ruin. This was a targeted, frantic demolition. Marcus had promised to ruin me financially, but this chaotic destruction bore the signature of someone acting out of pure, unadulterated panic. Marcus was a corporate sniper. He operated in boardrooms and courtrooms. Breaking into a shabby apartment and slicing open mattresses was the work of desperate thugs hired by a desperate man. The silence of the ruined apartment shattered as a harsh ringtone pierced the air. The sound came from my own coat pocket. I pulled out my cell phone. The screen illuminated the darkness, displaying a name I had not seen on caller ID outside of holiday obligations in years. Richard Evans. I swiped the screen to answer and lifted the speaker to my ear. I did not say hello, I just waited. "Where did you hide Clara's USB drive?" My father did not offer a greeting either. His voice was ragged, pitched high with an anxiety I had never heard from him before. The polished, intimidating CEO who had cornered me in the courthouse hallway just hours ago was gone. In his place was a man losing his grip on reality. I stood amid the shredded remains of my life, my eyes fixed on the slashed couch cushions. I did not respond immediately, letting his heavy, erratic breathing fill the silence on the line. "Answer me, Chloe," Richard demanded, the volume of his voice rising into a frantic bark. "Do not play stupid. You do not know what that old woman was holding. You do not understand the secrets she locked away. Give me the drive and I will call off the lawyers. I will wire you 50 grand right now. Just tell me where the flash drive is." The missing puzzle piece snapped into place. The probate battle was never just about Clara's coastal estate or the $4.2 million trust fund. The money was the prize for Marcus. The money would plug the gaping holes in Richard's failing shell companies. But the money was not the reason they were breaking into my home. Clara was a meticulous woman. She spent years observing Richard and Patricia, funneling money, manipulating assets, and living far beyond their legitimate means. She knew my father was involved in illicit financial maneuvers. She had gathered proof. Clara possessed a digital record, a USB drive containing evidence explosive enough to send a prominent businessman to federal prison. They searched my apartment because they believed Clara mailed the drive to me before she died. They tore apart my books and sliced open my mattress, hoping to find a small plastic device that held their doom. I slid my free hand back into my coat pocket. My fingertips brushed against the cold brass of the Chase Bank key. Clara did not mail me a USB drive. She mailed me a coat containing the key to a vault. The drive was sitting inside a reinforced steel box in a bank downtown, waiting for me to retrieve it. I kept my voice unnervingly flat, stripping away any trace of fear or intimidation. "You broke into the wrong house, Richard." I listened to the sudden hitch in his breathing. He realized I was standing inside the apartment staring at his handiwork. "I do not have any USB drive." I continued pacing slowly across the glass-strewn floor. "But your hired hands made a critical error. You focused so much on tearing apart my bed that you failed to notice the wireless security camera I installed inside the air vent yesterday morning. The footage of your thugs breaking down my door is already uploading to a secure cloud server. It was a complete fabrication. I could not afford groceries, let alone a covert surveillance system. But Richard was operating on fear, and fear compromises logic. "If you send anyone else to my home," I said, dropping my tone to a sharp, quiet whisper. "The Chicago Police Department will receive that video file, along with a formal statement regarding your attempt to extort me at the courthouse." A sharp intake of breath hissed through the receiver. Then, without another word, the line went dead. I lowered the phone from my ear. The bluff would only buy me a few hours. Once Richard realized the police were not knocking on his door, he would regroup. He would call Marcus. Marcus would realize the USB had to be stored in a secure financial institution. With his extensive network of contacts in the banking sector, Marcus could easily freeze Clara's safe deposit boxes, just like he froze my checking account. I glanced at the digital clock on my phone screen. It was shortly past midnight. The downtown branch of Chase Bank opened its doors at exactly 8 in the morning. I had less than 8 hours to access the vault before Marcus deployed his insider connections to seal it shut permanently. I did not bother cleaning up the apartment. There was no point in fixing a space I might never return to. Instead, I moved methodically through the wreckage, gathering only the absolute essentials. I found a small canvas duffel bag buried under a pile of torn clothes. I packed a clean sweater, my laptop, my phone charger, and every piece of physical identification I possessed: passport, birth certificate, social security card. I needed undeniable proof of my identity to bypass any hurdles at the bank teller window. I sat down on the only upright chair remaining in the kitchen. I did not sleep. Closing my eyes felt too dangerous. I spent the remainder of the night staring out the window, watching the streetlights flicker against the dark asphalt. I mentally rehearsed every possible scenario for the morning. I had to walk into that bank, present the key claim my rights as Clara's beneficiary, and secure the USB drive before the Wall Street executives woke up and realized they had been outmaneuvered. The sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light over the frozen city. I picked up my duffel bag, zipped my coat, and stepped out into the freezing morning air, ready to claim my arsenal. 8 in the morning. The freezing wind whipped across the concrete plaza of downtown Chicago as I approached the towering glass facade of the Chase Bank building. The heavy revolving doors groaned under my weight as I pushed through them. The lobby smelled of polished granite and stale corporate coffee. My boots squeaked against the pristine marble floor, drawing the attention of a lone security guard stationed near the entrance. I was running on zero sleep, my muscles aching from the miles I had walked in the bitter cold. I bypassed the automated teller machines and marched straight toward the main customer service counter. I dropped my canvas duffel bag onto the floor and unzipped the front pocket. My hands were stiff from the cold, but my movements were precise. I retrieved the brass safe deposit box key, my passport, and the printed summary of the estate trust that Judge Sterling had handed me the previous day. I slid the items across the cool stone counter toward a young teller wearing a name tag that read, Sarah. I kept my voice steady, requesting immediate access to the vault registered under Clara Evans. The teller offered a polite nod and began typing my information into her terminal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard for a few seconds before she paused. A deep frown formed on her face. She picked up a desk phone and dialed an internal extension, her eyes darting nervously toward a frosted glass door at the back of the lobby. Before the teller could speak a single word into the receiver, that frosted glass door swung open. My blood ran cold. Stepping out onto the main floor was Marcus Cole. He wore a fresh, immaculate navy blue suit, projecting the image of a man who owned the entire financial institution. Flanking him on either side were 2 uniformed bank security guards, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. Trailing slightly behind the guards was a balding man with nervous sweat glistening on his forehead. His lapel pin identified him as the branch manager. Marcus did not look surprised to see me standing there. He looked deeply amused. Marcus strolled up to the teller counter, invading my personal space with calculated ease. He offered a predatory hollow smile. "Sister-in-law, what a remarkable coincidence to find you here so early." Marcus said, his voice dripping with a mock politeness that made my skin crawl. He did not wait for my response. He reached into his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a crisp, notarized document. He slapped the paper down on the marble counter covering my passport entirely. He turned his attention to the sweating branch manager, ignoring me as if I were a speck of dirt on his shoe. Marcus announced that he was the temporary administrator of the Clara Evans estate. He claimed the document he just presented was a durable power of attorney, allegedly signed by Clara just days before her passing. He instructed the branch manager to seal the safe deposit box immediately and deny me any access to the vault. I looked at the balding manager. His eyes darted frantically between Marcus and me. Marcus was a high-level investment banker. He likely managed massive corporate portfolios that flowed directly through this very branch. His Wall Street influence was buying him illegal favors, leveraging his wealth to bend the rules of a federally regulated bank. The manager cleared his throat, his face flushing a blotchy red. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. He told me I needed to leave the premises. He stated that the power of attorney document superseded my claims and that the bank's legal team would need weeks to sort out the dispute. Panic threatened to paralyze my vocal cords. The 2 security guards shifted their weight, stepping closer to me, ready to physically escort me out into the freezing street. I stared down at the forged document resting on the counter. The signature at the bottom closely resembled Clara's looping cursive, but the timing was physically impossible. Clara had been in a medically induced coma during her final week of life. She could not have signed a legal directive. More importantly, a memory surfaced in my exhausted mind. I remembered a quiet Sunday afternoon I spent with Clara in her sunroom years ago. She was reading a dense financial thriller novel, sipping her tea. She had looked up at me over the rim of her glasses and shared a piece of wisdom I never forgot. Do not ever argue morality with people who worship money, Chloe. You have to use their own regulatory rule books to build a trap they cannot escape. I did not argue with Marcus. I did not yell at the nervous branch manager. I did not beg the security guards to let me stay. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I dialed a toll-free number I had memorized during my desperate late-night research into probate and banking laws. I tapped the speaker icon on my screen and set the device down on the hard marble counter for everyone to hear. The line rang twice. A representative answered, identifying the agency as the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I spoke with clinical, devastating precision, ensuring my voice echoed across the quiet bank lobby. My name is Chloe Evans. I am reporting an active real-time federal banking violation at a downtown Chicago Chase branch. A branch manager is currently colluding with a private investment banker to seize a deceased client's safe deposit box. They are attempting to use a power of attorney document to lock out the legal beneficiary. Under United States law, a power of attorney legally expires the exact second the principal dies. They are executing this lockout without presenting valid letters testamentary from a probate judge, which is a direct violation of federal estate laws and banking compliance protocols. The impact of my words struck the room like a physical blow. The blood drained rapidly from the branch manager's face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. Federal banking regulators do not issue polite warnings for unauthorized estate tampering or compliance fraud. They issue crippling institutional fines, revoke operating licenses, and hand out federal prison sentences. The manager scrambled forward, nearly knocking Marcus sideways in his rush to reach the teller terminal. He stammered a frantic, breathless apology to the phone speaker, insisting there had been a miscommunication. He ended the call, then turned on Marcus with wide, terrified eyes. He loudly stated that the bank could not and would not honor the expired power of attorney. He ordered the two security guards to stand down immediately. He told Marcus that without a valid court order bearing a judge's wet signature, no one from his investment firm was allowed anywhere near the vault. Marcus stared at me. The pristine mask of corporate arrogance shattered into a million pieces. The raw hatred burning in his dark eyes was intense enough to scorch the air between us. He realized in that agonizing moment that he had severely miscalculated. He thought I was a starving, desperate artist he could easily bully into submission. He did not expect me to weaponize federal compliance laws against his backroom handshake deals. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles twitched. He snatched his forged legal document off the marble counter, turned on his heel, and marched out of the lobby. The heavy glass doors vibrated in their frames as he exited the building. The branch manager pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the heavy sweat from his brow. He did not speak another word to me. He simply gestured for me to follow him personally, escorting me past the teller station and toward the heavy stainless steel gates of the main vault. My hands trembled as we walked through the narrow, silent rows of metal deposit boxes. The air inside the vault was cool and smelled of aged steel. We located the long rectangular box matching the 4-digit serial number on my key. I inserted my brass key into the left lock while the manager inserted his master key into the right. We turned them simultaneously. The heavy locking mechanism clicked with a loud, satisfying thud. The manager pulled the metal container free, handed it to me, and guided me into a private, windowless viewing room. He closed the door behind me, leaving me entirely alone. I set the metal box down on the polished wooden table. I took a deep, steadying breath, trying to calm the rapid beating of my heart. I lifted the hinged lid. Inside, resting on a bed of dark blue velvet, lay a thick stack of personalized stationery. It was the original handwritten will, dated and signed with Clara's unmistakable script. I scanned the first page, confirming what Judge Sterling had already told me. It definitively named me as the sole legal heir to her entire estate, bypassing my parents entirely. But the paperwork was not the prize. Tucked carefully beneath the stack of legal documents was a small silver USB drive. I picked it up, feeling it surprisingly lightweight in the palm of my hand. A piece of white masking tape was wrapped tightly around the metal casing. Clara had written a clear, stark label across the tape in thick black ink: Marcus and Richard laundering files. My father and my brother-in-law were not just greedy relatives trying to steal a coastal house. They were active criminals, and I was holding the exact digital evidence that would tear their lives apart. I slipped the drive into my pocket, unaware that retrieving this evidence would trigger a digital war that could cost me my freedom. I navigated the subway system with the silver flash drive burning a hole in my pocket. The transit card reader accepted my last remaining emergency token, a piece of plastic I kept hidden in my shoe for desperate situations. I rode the train in silence, watching the gray skyline blur past the smeared glass. I returned to my suburban apartment, stepping carefully over the splintered doorframe and the foam guts of my slashed couch. The freezing draft from the broken door chilled the room, but I ignored the temperature. I cleared a small space on the kitchen counter, sweeping shattered picture frames and torn books onto the floor. I opened my laptop, plugged the power cord into the wall, and inserted Clara's drive into the side port. The device mounted instantly. A single folder appeared on the screen titled simply, with a date from 2 weeks before Clara fell into her coma. I double-clicked the icon. The contents laid bare a staggering network of corporate fraud. Dozens of spreadsheets, scanned wire transfer receipts, and intercepted emails filled the directory. As I clicked through the PDF documents, the true nature of my family dynamic came into sharp focus. Richard was not a victim of a shifting economy. His commercial real estate ventures had been bankrupt for over a decade. He owed millions to private lenders and aggressive creditors. He was drowning. Marcus Cole did not marry into our family out of love for Madison. He recognized a desperate, failing businessman and saw the perfect vehicle for an illegal financial pipeline. The spreadsheets detailed how Marcus funneled unregulated, dirty capital from his Wall Street investment clients into Richard's hollow companies. My father acted as the front man, creating fake invoices for phantom construction projects. The dirty money flowed into Richard's domestic accounts, washed through the fake business expenses, and emerged clean. Marcus then wired the sanitized funds to offshore shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Marcus kept the lion's share of the profits, while Richard took just enough off the top to maintain his luxury cars and tailored suits. Clara had spent years quietly tracking the routing numbers, archiving the fake invoices, and mapping the entire money laundering syndicate. She possessed the exact digital footprint required to dismantle them. I scrolled through a lengthy ledger detailing a Cayman transfer, my eyes tracing the staggering dollar amounts. I was holding the key to multiple federal indictments. Then the cooling fan inside my laptop roared to life, spinning at maximum speed. The screen flickered. A jagged line of static cut across the display. I reached for the trackpad to close the ledger, but the cursor did not respond to my touch. Instead, the small white arrow jerked across the monitor with robotic precision. It moved on its own, dragging across the desktop and clicking out of the USB directory. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Someone was inside my machine. The unseen intruder operated with terrifying speed. The cursor darted toward the main hard drive directory, bypassing my personal folders and diving straight into the root storage. It opened the master folder containing my entire professional life. 10 years of graphic design portfolios, active client projects, vector assets, and finalized marketing campaigns filled the window. These files were the only way I paid my rent. They represented thousands of hours of grueling freelance labor. Before I could reach forward to manually rip the power cord from the wall, the cursor highlighted the entire directory. A command prompt flashed briefly on the screen. The deletion bar appeared, racing from 0 to 100% in a matter of seconds. My livelihood vanished into the digital void. The intruder did not just move the files to the recycling bin. They executed a hard wipe, scrubbing the data directly from the physical memory sectors. Years of work, my sole source of income, evaporated before my eyes. I slammed my hand down on the keyboard, trying to force a manual shutdown, but the system ignored the command. The operating system had been hijacked at the administrative level. The screen shifted from the desktop view to a solid pitch-black void. A plain white text box materialized in the center of the darkness. Letters began to appear typed out one by the remote user. That is the price of curiosity. I stood frozen in the wrecked kitchen, reading the glowing words as they formed a chilling ultimatum. Hand over the physical drive. If you refuse tomorrow morning, every corporate contact vendor and client in your address book will receive an email sent directly from your IP address. The emails will contain a highly destructive malware payload. By noon, the FBI will trace the cyber attack back to this exact apartment. You will be indicted for distributing malicious software across state lines. You have until midnight to surrender the hardware. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence, a rhythmic, mocking pulse. Marcus was leveraging his vast network of corporate fixers and hired hackers to sever my lifeline. He knew I had the drive, and he retaliated with overwhelming digital force. He destroyed my career and threatened me with federal prison in a single calculated strike. He weaponized my own computer against me, framing me for a cybercrime I did not commit, all to force me into handing over Clara's evidence. The screen went entirely dark, the laptop shutting down automatically. I stood alone in the freezing, dismantled apartment. My bank accounts were frozen. My physical space was destroyed. Now my professional reputation and my freedom were dangling over a cliff. Marcus assumed he had backed me into an inescapable corner. He believed that wiping a freelancer's hard drive was the equivalent of a digital execution. He thought his intimidation tactics would leave me crying in the dark, desperate to trade the evidence for my survival. He made a catastrophic miscalculation. I stepped away from the dead laptop. I walked past the slashed couch and the broken picture frames, moving into the narrow hallway that led to the bathroom. I reached up toward the ceiling ventilation grate. I used a flathead screwdriver I kept on the counter to unscrew the metal cover. I reached my arm deep into the dusty, dark ductwork, my fingers brushing past the cold aluminum. I pulled out a small, heavy, shock-proof external hard drive wrapped in an anti-static bag. Marcus lived in a world of high-speed trading and cloud computing. He relied on constant, immediate connectivity. He did not understand the paranoid reality of a freelance designer who could not afford to lose a single invoice to a random power outage. I never trusted my primary machine with my survival. Every single night before I went to sleep, I mirrored my entire professional portfolio onto an offline, air-gapped, solid-state drive. The device never touched the internet. It never connected to a network. It sat hidden in the ventilation shaft, immune to remote access Trojans and Wall Street hackers. My livelihood was entirely safe. My files were untouched. More importantly, the sheer arrogance of the attack just handed me a profound strategic advantage. Marcus Cole was an investment banker orchestrating a massive money laundering operation. He was smart enough to hide his financial tracks behind shell companies, but he was arrogant enough to deploy a remote access attack against a civilian computer. Under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, unauthorized intrusion into a personal device across state lines was a severe federal offense. By hacking my laptop to issue a threat, Marcus left a distinct digital signature with my internet service provider. He did not just destroy my local files. He delivered a verified, trackable instance of cyber extortion straight into my hands. I held the physical backup drive in my palm, the cool metal casing grounding my thoughts. Marcus thought he was playing a game of intimidation. I was preparing a federal trap. I needed to act quickly before he realized his blackmail attempt had failed, and before he tried to physically silence me next. I packed my offline drive alongside Clara's USB, preparing to leverage my invisible ally. The morning sun filtered through the cracked blinds of my ruined apartment, casting long, harsh shadows over the slashed furniture. I sat on the floor, my offline backup drive safely zipped into my duffel bag alongside Clara's damning USB. I was cut off from the banking system, locked out of my digital life, and bracing for Marcus to escalate his threats. I stared at the blank screen of my phone, waiting for the battery to die. A sudden chime echoed in the quiet room. It was a new email notification. The message bypassed my standard spam filters, landing directly in my primary inbox. The sender address belonged to Patricia Evans. I opened the email, my eyes scanning the brief, carefully constructed text. Chloe, I know things escalated terribly yesterday. We were blinded by grief and panic over Clara. We made unforgivable mistakes. Your father is deeply remorseful, and we want to make things right before this tears our family apart permanently. Please meet us for an early dinner at Le Bernardin this afternoon, just the three of us. We want to apologize face to face and find a peaceful resolution. I read the words again. The tone was unnervingly soft, projecting the image of a desperate, regretful mother extending an olive branch. The timing was perfectly engineered to exploit my vulnerability. They knew I was exhausted, frightened, and broke. They assumed the stress of the cyber attack and the physical destruction of my home had broken my spirit. Offering a warm meal at a Michelin-starred restaurant was a calculated attempt to lure me into a false sense of security. I did not believe a single word of the apology. Richard and Patricia did not operate on remorse. They operated on leverage. They wanted the USB drive, and they were shifting their tactics from brute force intimidation to psychological manipulation. I decided to accept the invitation. I needed to see exactly how desperate they had become, and I needed to gather more ammunition before I approached the federal authorities. I typed a brief confirmation reply, grabbed my canvas bag, and headed back out into the freezing Chicago air. Le Bernardin projected an atmosphere of quiet, intimidating wealth. The lighting was muted, the carpets thick enough to swallow the sound of footsteps, and the waitstaff moved with silent precision. I was directed to a private dining room at the back of the establishment. The heavy mahogany door was closed. I took a deep breath, adjusted the collar of Clara's wool coat, and pushed the door open. My parents were seated at a polished round table. Richard wore another bespoke suit, looking remarkably composed for a man facing federal money laundering charges. Patricia sat beside him, sipping sparkling water, her posture rigid and unyielding. They were not alone. Sitting directly across from them was a man I did not recognize. He had a sharp, predatory face, thin lips, and cold, reptilian eyes. He wore a gray suit that looked expensive, but lacked the effortless elegance of Richard's attire. A thick leather briefcase rested on the chair beside him. "Chloe, please sit," Richard said, gesturing to the empty chair opposite the stranger. He did not offer an apology. The facade of the remorseful father vanished the moment the door closed behind me. I sat down, keeping my canvas bag firmly on my lap. I looked from my father to the stranger. "This is Arthur Vance." Richard continued, his voice smooth and transactional. "He is an attorney specializing in aggressive estate litigation." Vance did not offer to shake my hand. He simply stared at me, his gaze analytical, assessing my frayed cuffs and exhausted demeanor. Without a word, he reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick stack of legal documents. He slid the papers across the polished table, stopping them just inches from my folded hands. The top page was clearly labeled Non-Disclosure and Settlement Agreement. "Let us dispense with the pleasantries," Richard said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. "We both know you retrieved Clara's flash drive from the bank this morning. We also know you are fully aware of its contents. I am offering you a very simple, highly lucrative exit strategy." He tapped his index finger against the thick NDA. "Sign this document. Hand over the USB drive right now. You agree to remain permanently silent regarding any financial matters involving myself or Marcus Cole. In exchange, Attorney Vance will authorize a wire transfer of $100,000 to an offshore account in your name. Additionally, the cyber lock on your professional portfolio will be lifted by midnight. You walk away rich, and your career is restored. $100,000. It was a staggering sum of money for a freelance designer facing eviction. But it was insulting compared to the $4.2 million trust they were actively trying to steal. They were attempting to buy my silence with pennies while holding my hijacked livelihood hostage. "If you refuse," Vance spoke up, his voice a dry, grating rasp, "we are prepared to initiate immediate legal action. My firm will file a civil suit accusing you of elder financial abuse." Patricia reached into her designer handbag and produced a single sheet of paper bearing the official letterhead of a prominent psychiatric clinic. She placed it deliberately on the table, right next to the NDA. "I have a signed medical evaluation from Clara's attending physician." Patricia stated, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. "It certifies that Clara was suffering from advanced dementia and paranoid delusions during her final months. It explicitly states she was mentally incompetent and incapable of drafting a legal will or managing her own assets." I stared at the medical certificate. It was a blatant forgery purchased from a corrupt doctor on Marcus's payroll. They were preparing to legally invalidate Clara's state of mind. By doing so, they could nullify the irrevocable trust, dismiss the evidence on the USB drive as the ravings of a delusional woman, and frame me as a manipulative predator exploiting a sick relative. They were trying to bind me with legal threats and extort me into surrendering the only leverage I held. I reached out and picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen, resting beside the NDA. I let my hand tremble slightly as I hovered the pen over the signature line. I lowered my gaze, projecting the image of a defeated, terrified woman finally buckling under overwhelming pressure. Richard leaned back in his chair, a triumphant smirk spreading across his face. Patricia let out a quiet sigh of relief. They thought they had won. They thought their combination of a massive bribe and a terrifying legal threat had shattered my resolve. They did not realize my left wrist was resting flat against the edge of the table. They did not notice the small, sleek smartwatch strapped to my arm. They could not see the subtle red recording icon pulsing steadily on the digital display. I had activated the audio recording application the moment I stepped into the restaurant. Every single word of their extortion attempt, the admission of the cyber attack, the offer of a six-figure bribe, and the presentation of the forged medical document was captured in crystal-clear, high-definition audio. I stopped trembling. My hand steadied. I tightened my grip on the expensive pen. I did not sign the document. Instead, I drove the metal tip of the pen hard into the polished mahogany table, leaving a deep, visible scratch in the expensive wood. I let go of the pen, leaving it standing upright, jammed into the surface. Attempting to corner a person who has absolutely nothing left to lose is a severe miscalculation, Mr. Evans. I kept my voice low, stripping away any trace of fear. The sudden shift in my demeanor caused the triumphant smirk to slide right off Richard's face. Vance narrowed his reptilian eyes, sensing the dynamic in the room had drastically altered. "You just admitted to orchestrating a cyber attack against a civilian," I said, looking directly at my father. "You offered a six-figure bribe to suppress evidence of federal money laundering. And you presented a fraudulent medical document to a beneficiary in the presence of legal counsel." I tapped the screen of my smartwatch. The recording stopped, and the file instantly synced to my secure offline cloud backup. "You did not bring me here to negotiate a settlement." I continued, standing up and grabbing my canvas bag. "You brought me here to hand me the exact audio evidence I need to secure an extortion conviction." Richard bolted out of his chair, his face contorting with sudden violent panic. He lunged across the table, knocking over Patricia's water glass in a desperate attempt to grab my wrist. I stepped back easily, dodging his grasping hands. "You will not walk out of this room," Richard snarled, his voice cracking with desperation. "Vance, stop her!" The attorney remained seated, his face pale. He understood the legal implications of a recorded extortion attempt better than anyone. He knew that interfering with me now would only add physical assault to the growing list of federal charges. I turned my back on my furious father and the paralyzed lawyer. I walked out of the private dining room, leaving the door wide open behind me. I strode through the hushed, elegant restaurant and out into the biting Chicago wind. I had the drive, I had the audio recording, and I had the offline backup of my career. The private battle was over. The public execution was about to begin. I navigated the return trip to my apartment in a state of hyper-vigilance. The adrenaline from the encounter at Le Bernardin still pulsed through my veins, but the physical toll of the last 24 hours was beginning to drag my body down. I climbed the metal stairs to my floor, stepping over the familiar splintered wood of my broken doorframe. The freezing draft from the hallway had settled permanently into the living space, turning the ruined room into an icebox. I dropped my canvas bag onto the floor and slid down the wall, pulling my knees to my chest. I needed a moment of silence to plan my next move with the federal authorities. The silence did not last. My cell phone rested on the kitchen counter a few feet away. It vibrated against the laminate surface. Then it vibrated again. Within seconds, a continuous, deafening hum filled the quiet apartment as a relentless avalanche of notifications poured into the device. The screen lit up, flashing with incoming alerts so rapidly the operating system struggled to process them. I pushed myself off the floor and grabbed the phone. The lock screen was a blur of activity. Instagram tags, direct messages, TikTok mentions, urgent emails. I unlocked the device and opened the primary social media application. Madison had launched her counterattack. My younger sister possessed 500,000 followers, a curated audience built on aesthetic lifestyle, posts luxury travel vlogs, and the carefully maintained illusion of a perfect American family. She weaponized that entire network against me in a matter of hours. The top video on her feed featured Madison sitting on a plush velvet sofa, wearing an oversized knit sweater to appear small and vulnerable. A soft ring light illuminated her face perfectly, highlighting the fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked directly into the camera lens, projecting the image of a heartbroken, desperate daughter. My older sister Chloe has been battling severe psychological issues for years, Madison said, her voice wavering with practiced emotion. We have tried everything to get her professional help. But yesterday, her paranoia reached a breaking point. She hijacked the legal authority over our late aunt's estate. She locked our elderly parents out of their own savings. Our mother requires urgent, expensive medical treatments, and Chloe is ruthlessly withholding the funds to punish us for trying to stage an intervention. Madison wiped a tear from her jawline, letting a heavy, dramatic sigh escape her lips. Please, if anyone knows Chloe or works with her, be careful. She is not the person she pretends to be. She is exploiting the legal system to bankrupt the very people who raised her. We are terrified for our safety. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. It was a masterful, devastating piece of digital assassination. Madison did not just tell a lie. She engineered a narrative that exploited the Internet's insatiable appetite for outrage. She painted herself and our parents as innocent, grieving victims, while casting me as a greedy, unhinged predator terrorizing the elderly. The comments section was a battlefield of vitriol. Thousands of strangers were tearing my life apart in real time. People I had never met demanded my arrest. They flooded the comment threads with my full name, the neighborhood where I lived, and links to my professional design portfolio. The digital mob was hunting me, fueled by my sister's fabricated tears. The real-world consequences manifested before the video even finished playing. A new email notification slid across the top of my screen. The sender was the creative director of a prominent tech startup, my largest and most consistent freelance client. The subject line simply read, "Vendor Agreement Termination." I tapped the email, my heart sinking as I read the cold corporate language. Chloe, we were recently forwarded a viral video containing deeply concerning allegations regarding your personal conduct and ethical standing. Our company enforces a strict morality clause for all independent contractors. Given the severe nature of these public accusations, we are immediately severing all professional ties. Please do not contact our offices further. Another email arrived, then a third. A local boutique canceled my upcoming branding project. A marketing agency revoked my access to their shared design portal. Former college classmates and casual acquaintances sent messages expressing their disgust before preemptively blocking my number. In the span of 45 minutes, Richard and Madison successfully dismantled my reputation. They could not defeat me in a courtroom, and they could not break my resolve in a private restaurant. So they outsourced the execution to the court of public opinion. They isolated me socially and decimated my income stream, knowing I lacked the financial resources or the digital platform to defend myself. I sank back down onto the cold hardwood floor, the reality of my situation settling over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I was a millionaire on paper, the legal beneficiary of a massive coastal estate and a lucrative trust fund. Yet I sat shivering in a dismantled, freezing apartment, my stomach cramped with sharp, persistent hunger pains. I had not eaten a proper meal in over a day. My bank accounts remained frozen under Marcus's legal hold. My wallet contained nothing but useless plastic cards and a few stray coins. I could not even afford to walk down to the corner store and purchase a loaf of bread. The psychological weight of being despised by thousands of people, combined with the physical torment of starvation and cold, pushed me to the brink of collapse. They wanted me to feel hopeless. They wanted me to surrender the USB drive just to make the public torment stop. I closed my eyes and rested my forehead against my knees. The silence of the apartment felt heavy, broken only by the distant wail of a police siren miles away. A sharp, distinct chime echoed from my phone. It was not the generic ping of a social media tag. It was the specific alert tone I assigned to my encrypted email application. I lifted my head and tapped the screen. A new message sat in my secure inbox. The sender address was a randomized string of alphanumeric characters originating from Proton Mail, a server known for strict anonymity. I opened the message. The text was brief, clinical, and stripped of any identifying context. I know what Marcus Cole is hiding on that flash drive. The digital ledgers you possess are a starting point, but they are not the kill shot. I read the opening lines, my pulse quickening. Someone inside Marcus's world was watching. Marcus is aware you have the drive, the message continued. His firm is initiating a rapid destruction protocol. They are currently shredding the physical contracts and wiping the offshore routing histories from their corporate servers. The USB you hold proves the money moved, but it lacks the physical signature linking Marcus directly to the Cayman accounts. He keeps the master ledger, the physical black book, locked inside an offline biometric safe in his home office. If he destroys that ledger, he can claim your USB as a fabricated digital forgery. The sender was right. A good defense attorney could argue a flash drive was easily manipulated. I needed the physical signatures. I needed the original paper trail. I can help you secure the physical ledger the email read. But I cannot remove it from the property without triggering the internal security alarms. You have to retrieve it yourself. This Saturday, Madison is hosting an extravagant gender reveal party at their estate. The house will be flooded with caterers, event staff, and dozens of guests. It is a massive security blind spot. I will provide you with a cloned access card that bypasses the biometric lock on his office door. You will have a 5-minute window while the security system is placed on standby for the catering crew. I stared at the glowing screen. A whistleblower was extending a lifeline, offering me the exact ammunition required to secure federal indictments against my father and my brother-in-law. But the cost of retrieving that ammunition was astronomical. To get the black book, I had to infiltrate a heavily guarded mansion surrounded by the very people who just destroyed my life. I had to walk directly into the center of a crowded party hosted by the sister who was currently fueling a viral hate campaign against me. If I was caught trespassing inside Marcus's home, the police would arrest me for burglary. The fabricated narrative of the unstable criminal sister would be validated on national television, and Marcus would legally destroy the evidence while I sat in a holding cell. It was an intricately designed trap, or it was the only path to absolute victory. I looked around the freezing, ruined living room. I felt the sharp ache of hunger in my ribs. They took my money. They took my reputation. They took my safety. I had nothing left to lose, which made me the most dangerous guest on Madison's invitation list. I tapped the reply button on the encrypted email. I typed a single decisive sentence. "Tell me where to meet you for the access card." The encrypted reply arrived in my inbox 20 minutes later. The instructions were brief, dictating a meeting location far removed from the financial district or my suburban neighborhood. I was to proceed to the lower level of an abandoned subway station undergoing renovation near the industrial sector on the south side. I gathered the last of my loose change, just enough to cover a single transit fare, and left the freezing apartment. The digital mob continued to tear my reputation apart online, but the screen of my phone remained dark in my pocket. I had a physical war to win. The subway station smelled of damp concrete and ozone. Faded yellow caution tape blocked off sections of the platform, and temporary lighting fixtures cast long, unnatural shadows against the tiled walls. The rumble of a distant train echoed through the tunnel, masking the sound of footsteps approaching from the opposite direction. A woman emerged from the gloom near a cluster of defunct ticket machines. She wore a heavy wool trench coat and a dark scarf pulled up high, obscuring the lower half of her face. She stopped 10 feet away from me, her eyes scanning the empty platform with practiced caution before she stepped under the harsh glare of a temporary work light. "I am the one who emailed you," she said, her voice low and steady. She did not offer a name, and I did not ask for one. I recognized the subtle tension in her posture, the hyper-vigilance of someone operating deep inside hostile territory. "I work in the Risk and Compliance Division at Colin Partners," she explained, confirming my suspicions. "I track internal irregularities. Over the past year, I noticed substantial capital moving through unregistered Cayman entities, always authorized directly by Marcus. When I dug deeper, I found an entirely parallel financial structure built on fraudulent invoices. Marcus is using his position to launder millions for your father's failing real estate ventures." "Why risk your career to help me?" I asked, keeping my tone strictly transactional. "Why not just take the evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission yourself?" The woman let out a short, humorless laugh. "Because Marcus Cole is a managing director who generates hundreds of millions in legitimate revenue for the firm," she replied, stepping closer. "The executive board protects him. If a mid-level compliance officer blows the whistle without physical proof, the firm will crush me. They will bury the evidence, fire me, and blacklist me from the industry. I need undeniable physical documentation tying Marcus directly to the Cayman routing numbers. The flash drive you possess is excellent, but an aggressive defense attorney will argue digital files can be fabricated or altered. We need the physical black ledger." She reached into the pocket of her trench coat and withdrew a small blank plastic key card. She held it out toward me. "Marcus does not trust cloud storage for his illicit operations," she continued. "He is too paranoid. He maintains the master ledger on an offline localized server secured inside his home office. This card is a cloned radio frequency identification key. It will bypass the biometric scanner on the reinforced door of his study." I took the smooth plastic card from her hand. It felt impossibly light for an object carrying such massive legal risk. "You need to understand the exact parameters of this operation," the woman warned, her eyes locking onto mine. "When you swipe this card, it creates a temporary loop in his home security system. You will have a maximum of 5 minutes to enter the room, locate the localized server, insert a specialized USB drive, and download the ledger. After exactly 300 seconds, the localized firewall will reboot log the unauthorized entry and trigger a silent alarm directly to Marcus's private security detail." She handed me a second item, a small black USB drive identical in shape to the one Clara had left me. "This drive contains an automated extraction script," she explained. "The moment you plug it into the server, it will bypass the local encryption, clone the ledger, and safely eject itself. You do not need a password. You just need access to the physical machine." I stared at the two objects resting in the palm of my hand. The legal implications crashed over me with terrifying clarity. If I crossed the threshold into Marcus's office without authorization, I was crossing the line from a civil dispute into criminal territory. This was no longer a battle over probate documents or frozen bank accounts. This was premeditated burglary, unauthorized access to a secured network, and corporate espionage. If I failed to extract the data within the 5-minute window, the private security detail would detain me. The police would arrive. Marcus would ensure I faced state and federal felony charges. The viral narrative Madison constructed about a mentally unstable criminal sister would become reality. I would trade a stolen inheritance for a decade in a federal penitentiary. I closed my fist around the keycard and the extraction drive. I cannot just walk up to his front door, I said, bringing the logistical nightmare into focus. Marcus has private security. Madison locked me out of the family circle. I cannot get past the driveway gate, let alone into the main house. The woman adjusted her scarf, her expression turning unreadably calm. You are already on the guest list, she stated simply. I stared at her confusion, warring with skepticism. Madison had just unleashed a digital mob to destroy my life. She would never allow me onto her property. Madison sent out electronic invitations for an extravagant gender reveal party this Saturday, the compliance officer explained. She sent one directly to your email address an hour ago. The invitation includes a personalized note. She demands you attend the party to issue a formal public apology to her and your parents in front of all their high society guests. She explicitly stated that if you refuse to show up and beg for forgiveness, she will permanently disown you and ensure the rest of the extended family does the same. A wave of cold, calculating fury washed over me. The invitation was not a genuine attempt at reconciliation. It was a carefully engineered public execution. Madison wanted to humiliate me in front of Chicago's elite. She wanted to stand in her mansion surrounded by catered food and wealthy friends and watch me grovel for mercy. She intended to use my public surrender as the final crowning piece of content for her social media narrative, proving once and for all that she was the gracious victim and I was the broken, remorseful villain. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, and it was the exact tactical error I needed her to make. Madison's insatiable need for public validation just provided me with the ultimate Trojan horse. The mansion would be swarming with caterers, event planners, photographers, and dozens of distracted guests. The sheer volume of foot traffic would overload the residential security protocols, creating the perfect, chaotic environment for an extraction operation. I looked down at the plastic keycard in my hand, then back up at the whistleblower standing in the dim light of the subway platform. The risk of federal prison loomed heavy in the damp air, but the alternative was a lifetime of subjugation to a family that viewed my existence as a disposable asset. They wanted a public surrender. They wanted to witness my total defeat. I slipped the cloned keycard and the extraction drive into the deep pocket of Clara's wool coat. I will be at the party, I said, turning away from the dim light. I have an apology to deliver. The sprawling estate in the northern suburbs was a monument to Marcus's illicit wealth. Massive wrought iron gates swung open to reveal a circular driveway packed with luxury sedans and European sports cars. The manicured lawn was overwhelmed by an explosion of pastel pink and blue balloon arches, signaling the extravagant gender reveal party Madison had engineered. I walked up the long paved driveway, shivering slightly in Clara's oversized wool coat. I intentionally wore the same worn clothing I had worn for the past 3 days. I needed to look exactly as defeated and destitute as Madison expected. The cloned keycard and the black extraction USB drive burned against my ribs, hidden deep within an interior pocket. I stepped through the massive double doors and into the chaotic, echoing foyer. The air was thick with the scent of expensive catering and high-end floral arrangements. Groups of elegantly dressed guests milled about holding flutes of champagne and laughing at private jokes. The moment I crossed the threshold, the conversational buzz nearest the door abruptly died. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. Aunts, uncles, and distant cousins who had likely watched Madison's viral video stared at me with varying expressions of disgust, pity, and outright hostility. They parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide physical barrier between themselves and the social pariah who had just walked into the room. Madison materialized from the crowd, descending the grand, sweeping staircase with theatrical grace. She wore a flowing custom silk maternity gown, radiating the manufactured glow of an influencer executing a flawless public relations campaign. She stopped 3 steps from the bottom, looking down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. She saw my unkempt hair, my tired eyes, and the fraying cuffs of my jacket. She saw a broken woman arriving to surrender. "Are you here to drop to your knees and beg? Chloe?" Madison asked, her voice carrying a loud, mocking edge designed to ensure the surrounding guests heard every word. I offered her a weak, trembling smile, playing the role of the humiliated sister to perfection. "I need a moment to compose myself before I speak to everyone," I said, keeping my head bowed and my voice meek. "I just need to use the restroom first. Please." Madison let out a sharp, derisive laugh, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. She gestured dismissively toward the hallway leading to the guest facilities. "Make it quick," she commanded, turning her back to engage a wealthy neighbor. "Do not keep your audience waiting. We have a lot of apologies to record." I slipped past the staring guests and ducked into the ornate hallway. The moment I was out of Madison's line of sight, my meek posture vanished. I moved with urgent, silent precision, bypassing the guest restrooms entirely. I navigated the labyrinthine layout of the mansion, relying on the floor plan I had memorized during awkward family holidays years prior. I headed straight for the secluded West Wing, the area Marcus designated as his private executive sanctuary. The corridor leading to the home office was eerily quiet, insulated from the thumping bass of the party music by thick, soundproof walls. I approached the heavy, solid oak door. A sleek, black biometric scanner glowed ominously beside the reinforced handle. I pulled the cloned keycard from my pocket. My hands were remarkably steady. The compliance officer warned me I only had 5 minutes before the system recognized the anomaly and triggered a silent alarm. I swiped the white plastic card against the reader. A sharp, singular beep broke the silence, followed by the heavy mechanical clank of the deadbolt retracting. I pushed the door open, slipped inside, and eased it shut until it clicked securely behind me. The office was a stark contrast to the pastel chaos outside. It was a dark, intimidating space filled with rich leather, dark wood paneling, and an overwhelming sense of clinical order. My eyes locked onto the target immediately. Sitting on the massive executive desk was an offline standalone server tower disconnected from any visible network cables. Beside it sat a sleek silver laptop, Marcus's primary terminal. I rushed to the desk and booted up the laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying a complex login prompt. I ignored the keyboard entirely. I pulled the black extraction drive from my pocket and jammed it directly into the primary USB port. The extraction script executed the moment the hardware connected. A stark black command window snapped open on the screen. Lines of green code cascaded down the monitor as the automated program bypassed the local encryption walls and burrowed directly into the master ledger directory. A progress bar materialized at the bottom of the screen, tracking the cloning process. 20%. I checked the digital clock on the bottom corner of the monitor. 1 minute had passed. I stared at the progress bar, willing it to move faster. The silence in the soundproof office felt suffocating, amplifying the rapid thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. 50%. 2 minutes remaining. The extraction script was pulling thousands of heavily encrypted financial records, wire transfer histories, and offshore routing codes. It was dragging every illicit transaction Marcus Cole ever authorized out of the darkness and into the light. 85%. The sharp, distinct click of stiletto heels echoed from the hallway, cutting through the heavy soundproofing. The footsteps were fast, aggressive, and moving directly toward the office door. My blood ran cold. Someone was coming. Before the extraction reached 90%, the heavy oak door flew open, crashing violently against the wood-paneled wall. Madison stood in the doorway, her silk maternity gown swirling around her legs. The smug, triumphant influencer mask was gone, replaced by a look of sheer frantic rage. She had grown impatient, waiting for my public apology, or perhaps the security system flagged the door breach faster than the compliance officer anticipated. "What the hell are you stealing?" Madison shrieked, her eyes darting from my face to the glowing monitor on the desk. She did not wait for an answer. She lunged across the expensive Persian rug, launching herself toward the desk with surprising speed. I tried to block her path, but she slammed her shoulder into my chest, knocking me off balance. Madison grabbed the edge of the sleek silver laptop and yanked it violently toward her chest, attempting to rip the machine away from my reach. 100%. Extraction complete. Safe to remove. The green text flashed across the screen just as Madison wrestled the laptop out of my grip. In the split second before she pulled the machine out of range, my hand shot forward. I clamped my fingers around the base of the black USB drive and ripped it free from the port. I stumbled backward, smoothly sliding my hand into the deep pocket of Clara's coat, dropping the physical evidence alongside the cloned keycard. Madison stood clutching the disconnected laptop, her chest heaving as she glared at me. "I am taking back what belongs to me," I lied smoothly, maintaining aggressive eye contact. "Marcus confiscated my personal work laptop last week. I am just retrieving my own property." Madison's eyes narrowed. She looked down at the expensive high-end machine in her hands. She knew instantly it was not a graphic designer's standard work computer. She realized I was lying, and she recognized I was standing inside the most secure room in the house. "Security," Madison screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing down the silent corridor. "We have a thief. Call the police right now." She dropped the laptop onto the leather sofa and charged at me, her hands raised, fingers curling into claws. The physical confrontation erupted in an instant. Madison grabbed the lapels of my coat, attempting to tackle me to the floor and hold me until the guards arrived. I shoved her backward, avoiding a direct strike to her pregnant stomach, but the force sent her crashing against the heavy wooden desk. She shrieked again, sweeping a heavy crystal decanter off the desk, sending it shattering into 100 pieces across the floor. The heavy thudding footsteps of private security guards echoed from the hallway, rapidly closing the distance to the office. A different, far more terrifying sound pierced the air. The faint, high-pitched wail of police sirens began to rise from the distance, growing louder by the second. The automated security system had tripped. Law enforcement was already converging on the estate. I was trapped deep inside a hostile mansion, surrounded by aggressive private security, with the stolen evidence of a massive federal crime sitting hot in my pocket. I had the kill shot, but I had absolutely no way out. 2 private security contractors burst through the office door, their massive frames instantly blocking the only exit. They did not draw weapons, but their aggressive posturing made it clear I was not leaving the room. Madison stood behind them, breathing heavily, adjusting her silk gown with shaking hands while glaring at me with venomous satisfaction. The wailing police sirens grew deafening outside, signaling the arrival of local law enforcement. Within minutes, the chaos shifted from the secluded office to the sprawling, brightly lit living room. 2 uniformed police officers escorted me down the grand staircase, their hands firmly grasping my upper arms. They forced me down onto a white leather sofa in the center of the room. The pastel balloons framing the space now felt like a grotesque mockery of my current predicament. The party guests had been corralled onto the outdoor patio, leaving only my immediate family to witness my impending arrest. Richard, Patricia, and Marcus stood in a tight semicircle across from the sofa, their arms crossed in unified, triumphant defiance. Marcus projected an aura of total control. He smoothed the lapels of his custom suit, stepping forward to address the older of the 2 officers. "Officer, this woman broke into my secure home office and attempted to steal highly sensitive company property." Marcus stated, his voice a masterclass in calm corporate authority. He pointed a long manicured finger toward the sleek silver laptop resting on the glass coffee table between us. "I caught her in the act holding that stolen machine. She poses a severe threat to my family and my business operations. I want her arrested for felony burglary immediately." The older officer pulled a small notepad from his breast pocket. He turned his stern gaze toward me, his expression hardened by years of dealing with domestic disturbances. Miss Evans, the officer, began reciting the mandatory warning with practiced speed. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Lock her up right now." Madison interjected, her voice shrill with vindictive delight. "She is insane. She broke into my home during a private event to rob us. Throw her in a cell and throw away the key." Patricia dabbed at imaginary tears with a lace handkerchief, playing the devastated mother for the benefit of the police. Richard simply smirked, confident that Marcus's wealth and influence had finally cornered me. They expected me to panic. They anticipated tears, frantic denials, and desperate pleas for mercy. They assumed the overwhelming presence of law enforcement would shatter my resolve and force me to surrender the extraction drive hidden deep in my pocket. I did not panic. I sat back against the pristine white leather, resting my hands calmly on my lap. "Officer, I understand the severity of the accusations," I said, keeping my tone respectful and remarkably even. "However, before you place me in handcuffs, I ask that you conduct a very brief physical inspection of the item in question." The officer paused, his pen hovering over his notepad. He glanced at Marcus, then back at me. "What kind of inspection?" the officer asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Please pick up the laptop from the table and turn it over." I requested, gesturing toward the sleek machine. "Inspect the bottom casing. You will find a specific asset identification number engraved directly into the metal." Marcus let out a dismissive scoff, rolling his eyes at the officers. "This is a ridiculous stalling tactic," Marcus insisted, taking a step toward the table. "She is trying to distract you. Arrest her." The older officer held up a hand, halting Marcus in his tracks. He stepped forward, picked up the silver laptop, and flipped it over. He examined the bottom casing closely under the bright living room lights. "There is an alphanumeric code laser engraved into the chassis," the officer confirmed, reading the sequence aloud. I reached into the interior pocket of Clara's wool coat. The motion caused the younger officer to instinctively rest his hand on his utility belt, but I moved slowly and deliberately. I bypassed the hidden extraction drive and retrieved a folded, officially stamped document. It was the certified copy of the Clara Evans Irrevocable Trust Agreement that Judge Sterling had validated in court. I unfolded the thick legal paper and handed it directly to the older officer. "Please review the attached schedule of assets on the second page." I instructed, my voice ringing clear in the silent room. "You will see a detailed inventory of the trust's physical property. That inventory includes the exact serial number you just read off the bottom of that laptop." The officer scanned the document, his eyes flicking back and forth between the engraved code on the machine and the printed text on the legal schedule. A frown deepened on his face as he realized the numbers matched perfectly. "This laptop does not belong to Marcus Cole," I stated, rising slowly from the sofa to face my accusers. "It belongs to the irrevocable trust established by my late Aunt Clara Evans. I am the sole legally designated beneficiary of that trust. That machine is my lawful property. It was unlawfully removed from my private residence 3 days ago during a break-in orchestrated by the very people standing in this room." The blood drained from Marcus's face with alarming speed. His dark skin took on an ashen, sickly pallor. The confident, untouchable Wall Street executive vanished, replaced by a man staring into the abyss of his own monumental error. He had assumed the sleek silver laptop sitting on his desk was his own secure terminal. He failed to realize that during the chaotic, frantic raid on my apartment, his hired thugs had grabbed Clara's high-end personal computer, confusing it with my standard graphic design equipment. They brought the stolen machine directly to his home office, placing it right next to his own identical model. When Madison interrupted my extraction operation, she grabbed the first silver laptop she saw, assuming she was protecting her husband's property. In reality, she physically handed me the undeniable proof that Marcus Cole was harboring stolen goods belonging to a protected federal trust. "This is a fabrication," Richard sputtered, stepping forward, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "She printed a fake document. She is lying to you, officer." The officer held up the trust agreement, pointing to the raised, embossed seal at the bottom of the page. "This document bears an official stamp from the Cook County Probate Court." The officer replied, his tone shifting from accusatory to strictly procedural. "The asset numbers match. I cannot arrest this woman for burglary when she is holding court-certified documentation proving the item in question belongs to her." Madison's mouth dropped open in horrified disbelief. "You cannot be serious," she shrieked, her influencer facade crumbling entirely. "She broke into my house, Are you just going to let her walk out of here with stolen property? Ma'am, the officer said firmly, handing the trust document back to me. Based on the evidence presented, this is a civil dispute regarding inherited assets. The police department does not intervene in probate matters. If you believe she is trespassing, I can ask her to leave the premises, but I am not placing her under arrest for retrieving her own documented property. I did not wait for an invitation to leave. I stepped forward and took the silver laptop directly from the officer's hands. I tucked it securely under my arm. The physical weight of the machine felt like a trophy. I looked at Marcus, offering him the same cold, detached smile he had given me outside the courthouse. He knew I had just walked into his secure fortress, extracted his illicit financial ledgers, and secured my own stolen property in a single devastating maneuver. He was utterly paralyzed, trapped by the presence of law enforcement and his own staggering incompetence. I turned my back on my family. I walked out the front doors of the mansion, leaving Madison screaming in frustrated, impotent rage. The pastel balloons bobbed cheerfully in the freezing wind as I marched down the driveway, clutching the laptop and the explosive evidence hidden in my pocket. I had survived the lion's den, but escaping the physical danger only initiated the final, most brutal phase of the financial war. The clock was ticking, and Marcus was not going to let me reach the authorities alive. The adrenaline that carried me out of the sprawling suburban estate began to fade long before I reached the city limits. I managed to secure a ride back to my neighborhood by trading a spare silver necklace to a sympathetic cab driver who frequented the train station. I sat in the back of his heated sedan, clutching the canvas duffel bag tight against my chest. Inside the bag rested the silver laptop and the small black USB drive holding the digital execution of my father and brother-in-law. I needed to reach my apartment, connect to my offline backup network, and prepare the evidence for transmission to the federal authorities. The cab driver dropped me off at the corner of my street. The pale morning sun offered no warmth against the bitter chill radiating off the Chicago pavement. I walked the remaining 2 blocks to my deteriorating building, my muscles aching with a deep, bone-chilling exhaustion. I climbed the metal staircase to the 2nd floor, desperate for a moment of quiet strategy behind a locked door. I reached the top landing and stopped dead in my tracks. My remaining possessions were piled haphazardly in the narrow corridor. Trash bags stuffed with my clothes, my drafting tablet, and a few surviving design books sat in a pathetic heap against the peeling wallpaper. Standing in front of my open apartment door was the building property manager. He held a cordless drill in one hand and a brand-new brass deadbolt in the other. I stepped forward, my voice catching in my throat as I demanded to know what he was doing. The property manager looked up, his expression a mixture of fatigue and irritation. He set the drill down on a nearby windowsill and pulled a folded piece of paper from his flannel shirt pocket. He did not look me in the eye as he handed the document over. "Your rent payment bounced this morning, Chloe," he said, his tone flat and uncompromising. "The transaction was flagged and reversed by your financial institution. When I called the bank to verify the routing error, their fraud department informed me that your profile is currently under a federal asset freeze. I cannot legally house a tenant whose financial identity has been locked by the government. The eviction notice is active. You have to leave the premises." I stared at the printed notice, the black text swimming before my exhausted eyes. My checking account was already locked by Marcus and his expired power of attorney stunt, but I had arranged for my rent to be drawn from a separate backup credit line I maintained precisely for emergencies. That secondary account was held at a completely different banking institution. It should have been safe from their reach. I pulled my cell phone from my coat pocket and opened my secure email application. My inbox was flooded with urgent notifications from every single financial service I utilized. Credit card companies, online payment processors, and local credit unions had all sent identical automated messages. "Your account has been suspended pending a regulatory investigation." I opened the detailed alert from my primary credit card provider. The harsh reality of my parents' ruthless strategy materialized on the glowing screen. Richard and Patricia had exploited one of the most vicious legal loopholes in the American financial system. They filed a sworn expedited affidavit with Adult Protective Services and the State Financial Crimes Division. In their official report, they accused me of severe elder financial abuse. They claimed I was a financially unstable predator, actively manipulating the estate of my late aunt and attempting to drain my elderly parents' retirement accounts through digital fraud. The brilliance of their attack lay in the bureaucratic response. When state agencies receive a sworn affidavit alleging the active financial exploitation of a senior citizen, the system does not wait for a trial. The system does not conduct a thorough preliminary investigation. To prevent the alleged predator from hiding the stolen funds, the government issues an immediate automated freeze across every single financial instrument tied to the accused individual's Social Security number. My parents weaponized a law designed to protect vulnerable seniors, turning it into an inescapable financial guillotine. They severed my access to every dime of credit, every backup savings account, and every emergency fund I possessed. Reversing an Adult Protective Services freeze required weeks of legal petitioning, courtroom appearances, and formal audits. I had no weeks. I had no money. I was entirely destitute. I stood in the freezing, drafty hallway clutching the eviction notice. I looked at the black trash bags containing the meager remnants of my life. My father and my brother-in-law engineered this destitution intentionally. They knew I escaped the mansion with the encrypted ledger. They knew they could not defeat me in a physical confrontation. Their ultimate strategy was to starve me into submission. They wanted me to freeze on the winter streets of Chicago until the physical torment broke my resolve. They expected me to call Richard, begging to trade the USB drive for a warm hotel room and a hot meal. I turned away from the property manager. I did not argue. I did not waste my precious remaining energy begging a man whose hands were tied by corporate policy. I left the trash bags sitting in the hallway. The only things that mattered were already packed inside the canvas bag slung across my shoulder. I walked back down the metal staircase and stepped out onto the unforgiving pavement. The wind chill had dropped significantly since the morning. The frigid air bit through my jeans and stung my bare face. I wrapped Clara's thick wool coat tighter around my body, seeking refuge in the heavy fabric. I began to walk down the desolate suburban street, possessing no destination, no transit fare, and no shelter. My phone vibrated sharply in my pocket. I pulled the device out. The battery indicator glowed a menacing red, displaying 12% power remaining. The incoming caller ID displayed a randomized string of digits. I swiped the screen to answer and lifted the speaker to my ear. "Are you in a secure location?" a tense, hushed voice demanded. It was the whistleblower from the subway station. The compliance officer sounded breathless, her words clipped by an overwhelming sense of panic. "I am out on the street," I replied, my teeth chattering slightly against the biting cold. "My family initiated a systemic freeze on my identity. I am locked out of everything. You need to listen to me very carefully," the compliance officer urged, ignoring my financial crisis to deliver her critical intelligence. "The situation inside the firm is catastrophic. Marcus discovered the security breach in his home office an hour ago. He checked the server logs and realized the master ledger was cloned. He knows you have the routing histories." I kept walking, forcing my stiff legs to maintain a steady pace down the concrete sidewalk. "What is his next move?" I asked, scanning the empty street for any signs of private security vehicles. "He is burning the entire operation to the ground," she revealed, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "He just ordered his internal technology team to wipe the corporate servers clean. He is destroying the digital invoices and shredding the physical contracts linking your father to the shell companies. But more importantly, Marcus is running." A heavy, dark knot formed in my stomach. "He chartered a private flight out of Midway Airport scheduled for tonight," the whistleblower continued. "He is flying direct to Geneva, Switzerland. He intends to personally liquidate the Cayman accounts from an untraceable terminal and vanish into a non-extradition jurisdiction. If he boards that plane, the money disappears forever and he escapes federal prosecution. He cannot run if the authorities lock his passport." I countered, my mind racing to formulate a countermeasure. "We have the evidence." "That is the reason I am calling you," she interrupted fiercely. I pulled the fire alarm on my end. I sent an anonymous priority tip to my contacts at the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Internal Revenue Service. They are preparing to execute a coordinated, unannounced raid on our corporate headquarters at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The magnitude of the impending raid sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline straight into my bloodstream. Federal agents were preparing to dismantle the investment bank, but there is a fatal flaw in the timeline the compliance officer warned, her tone turning grim. The federal agents cannot ground a private charter flight or freeze international assets based on an anonymous tip alone. They need probable cause. They need the unencrypted raw data from the master ledger to secure an emergency injunction from a federal judge. I have the data right here in my bag, I assured her, gripping the canvas strap tight. I can email the files to the agency. Digital transmissions are intercepted and stalled by corporate defense firewalls every single day, she argued swiftly. A defense attorney will claim the emailed files are corrupted or fabricated by a disgruntled third party. The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Division requires the physical hardware. They need the actual USB drive submitted directly into their secure evidence intake system to establish a verifiable chain of custody. I stopped walking. The bitter wind whipped my hair across my face. When do they need the physical drive, I asked, dreading the answer. Before the Regional Intake Processing Center closes for the day, she replied. You have to deliver that drive to the Central Federal Processing Facility downtown before 5 o'clock this evening. If that evidence is not in their possession and logged into their system before Marcus reaches the runway, he flies away clean. Your father gets away with the fraud, and you remain destitute for the rest of your life. The line went dead. The compliance officer disconnected the call, leaving me standing alone on the frozen sidewalk. I lowered the phone and checked the digital clock on the lock screen. It was shortly past noon. I had less than 5 hours to deliver the kill shot to the federal government. I opened my transit application, praying for a miracle. My digital wallet showed a balance of 0. I could not summon a rideshare vehicle. I could not purchase a train ticket. I was stranded in the deep suburbs, entirely isolated from the downtown financial district. I pulled up the mapping application and typed in the address for the Central Federal Processing Facility. The route calculated instantly, drawing a solid blue line across the digital grid. The destination was exactly 10 miles away, 10 miles of unforgiving concrete, freezing temperatures and biting winds. 10 miles standing between me and the total destruction of the people who stole my future. My feet were numb. My stomach ached from starvation. My hands were stiff from the glacial chill. Richard and Patricia gambled their freedom on the belief that physical suffering would break my spirit. They believed the cold would force me to drop to my knees and surrender the evidence. I slid my phone back into my pocket. I adjusted the heavy strap of the canvas duffel bag across my shoulder, feeling the solid weight of the silver laptop resting against my hip. I buried my bare hands deep into the thick, warm pockets of Clara's vintage coat. I looked down the long gray stretch of the suburban road, pointing directly toward the towering skyline of the city in the distance. I took a deep breath of the freezing air, letting the sharp chill clear my mind of any lingering hesitation. I placed one worn boot in front of the other, and I began the long, punishing march to end the war. 1 week had passed since the bitter, frozen pavement of the city tested my physical endurance. 1 week since I dropped that padded envelope containing the master financial ledger into the secure blue collection box mere seconds before my father ambushed me on the sidewalk. Richard had collapsed on the concrete that day, his bravado shattering as he realized the evidence of his money laundering syndicate was already in transit to federal investigators. Yet arrogance possesses a terrifying resilience. Instead of fleeing the jurisdiction or preparing a surrender, my family doubled down on their deception. They believed their deep pockets and corporate connections could still buy them an escape route from the impending storm. We returned to the familiar, intimidating mahogany benches of Judge Thomas Sterling's courtroom. The atmosphere inside the chamber felt entirely different today. The air was thick with unspoken hostility and high-stakes desperation. I sat alone at the petitioner table. My bank accounts remained temporarily frozen. My freelance career was still in ruins from the cyber attack. And I wore the exact same frayed blazer and Clara's vintage wool coat. But my posture was entirely different. I sat with my spine perfectly straight, my hands resting calmly on the wooden surface in front of me. I was no longer the frightened, destitute daughter they could easily manipulate. Across the center aisle, Richard and Patricia sat flanking their newly retained counsel. They had spared no expense hiring a high-profile predatory defense litigator renowned throughout Chicago for burying opposing parties in procedural technicalities and character assassination. Behind them, occupying the spectator gallery, sat Marcus Cole and my sister Madison. Marcus wore a tailored charcoal suit, his arms crossed over his chest, projecting an aura of untouchable confidence. He assumed the federal raid on his investment firm had yielded nothing but shredded paper and wiped servers. Madison clutched a designer handbag, shooting me venomous, mocking glances whenever the court bailiff looked away. They all believed their latest fabrication would save them. The defense litigator stood smoothing his expensive silk tie and addressed the bench with booming theatrical authority. He claimed the previous hearing was marred by tragic misunderstandings and administrative oversights. He announced that during a recent thorough cleaning of Clara's personal effects, my parents had uncovered a hidden, superseding document. He approached the high bench and handed Judge Sterling a crisp, freshly printed file enclosed in a blue legal folder. The litigator declared the document to be Clara's final definitive last will and testament. He stated the paperwork was drafted, witnessed, and signed a mere 3 days before her passing. The terms contained within the pages were brutally simple. The new will revoked the irrevocable trust entirely. It transferred 100% of Clara's estate, including the coastal property and the multi-million-dollar liquid assets, directly to her devoted brother-in-law, Richard Evans. The defense attorney did not stop at presenting the fraudulent document. He pivoted smoothly, leveling a pointed finger in my direction, and launched into a calculated, vicious defamation campaign. He told the court I was a financially destitute, unstable individual. He painted a vivid picture of a desperate freelancer exhibiting severe paranoid delusions, claiming I was attempting to hijack a grieving family's rightful inheritance to pay off my own mounting debts. He explicitly referenced the Adult Protective Services freeze on my checking accounts, using the very crisis my parents engineered as definitive proof of my predatory nature. I did not object to his monologue. I did not interrupt his performance or shout frantic denials across the room. I simply sat and listened to the intricate web of lies being spun for the public record. I glanced back at the spectator gallery. Marcus offered a slow, predatory smirk, convinced his wealth had insulated him from consequence. Madison leaned into his shoulder, whispering something that made them both chuckle quietly. They thought they had executed a flawless legal maneuver by bribing a corrupt notary public to backdate a forged signature on a fake, while they intended to overwrite reality. They believed securing the estate would grant Richard the immediate liquid capital required to pay off his offshore creditors and flee the country, evading the federal indictments they knew were looming over their heads. Judge Sterling accepted the document from the defense attorney. The courtroom fell silent save for the distinct rustle of thick legal paper. Sterling flipped through the pages, his sharp eyes scanning the paragraphs, the signature lines, and the brightly colored notary seal stamped at the bottom of the final sheet. He turned the document over, inspecting the watermark and the binding. His expression remained entirely unreadable, giving nothing away to the anxious litigator standing before him. The highly paid attorney returned to the defense table, standing tall, awaiting the inevitable ruling in his favor. He anticipated the judge dismissing my original claims, validating the new will, and effectively ending the probate battle right then and there. Instead, Judge Sterling lowered the document to his desk. He took off his reading glasses and folded the arms with a quiet, deliberate click. Sterling did not look at the defense attorney. He did not look at Richard or Patricia, who were practically vibrating with anticipation in their seats. He looked directly across the room at me. His gaze was piercing, communicating a silent, crucial question across the expanse of the courtroom. I met his eyes steadily. I offered a single, almost imperceptible nod. The trap was fully primed. A cold, razor-sharp smile touched the corners of Judge Sterling's mouth. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the expression of a seasoned jurist recognizing prey that had willingly, arrogantly walked into a snare. He shifted his attention back to the defense table, his eyes locking onto the confident litigator. "This is a remarkably pristine document, Counselor," Sterling stated, his voice echoing loudly against the high ceiling of the chamber. "The formatting is flawless. The signatures are clear. The notary seal is vibrant. You have presented a very perfect will to this court today." The defense attorney beamed, puffing out his chest, taking the judge's words as a profound compliment. Richard let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief, reaching over to pat Patricia's hand. In the gallery, Marcus uncrossed his arms, preparing to stand up and celebrate his ultimate victory over the sister-in-law he thought he had crushed. However, Sterling continued, his tone dropping an octave, slicing through their premature celebration like a physical blade. "I'm afraid the standard proceedings of this probate hearing must be temporarily suspended." The smug satisfaction vanished from the defense attorney's face in an instant. Richard's posture stiffened, his hand freezing over his wife's fingers. Marcus leaned forward in the gallery, his eyes narrowing in sudden sharp suspicion. Today's docket will feature the participation of a few special guests who have a profound interest in this specific newly discovered document, Sterling announced, his gaze sweeping over the suddenly terrified faces of my family. Sterling picked up his wooden gavel, but he did not strike the sounding block to call for order. Instead, he pointed the handle directly toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. Bailiff Sterling commanded, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "Please open the doors. All rise." The heavy oak double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding hollow thud that echoed off the high ceiling. The sound sliced through the tense silence of the chamber, drawing every eye away from Judge Sterling's bench. 4 individuals strode through the entryway, moving in perfect synchronized formation. They did not wear the standard uniforms of local law enforcement or the dark suits of civil litigators. They wore sharp, dark business attire, their faces grim and set with absolute professional purpose. Clipped securely to the breast pockets of their jackets were distinct, unmistakable federal badges. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the courtroom glinted off the golden shields, identifying them as special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The entire courtroom seemed to collectively stop breathing. The highly paid defense attorney froze at his table, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. He stared at the approaching agents, the color rapidly draining from his face as he realized his prestigious law firm was suddenly entangled in a massive federal sting operation. Patricia gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning white, her eyes wide with uncomprehending terror. In the spectator gallery, the facade of Wall Street invincibility shattered into a million pieces. Marcus Cole realized what was happening the instant the sunlight caught the federal shields. The confident investment banker bolted upward from the wooden bench. He shoved past Madison, his designer shoes scrambling for traction on the polished floor, desperate to reach the side exit door leading toward the stairwell. He did not make it past the front row. 2 broad-shouldered United States Marshals, previously stationed inconspicuously near the judge's chambers, moved with terrifying speed. They intercepted Marcus before he could clear the aisle, stepping directly into his path and forcing him backward. The marshals grabbed his arms, pinning the frantic executive against the heavy wooden paneling of the gallery wall. Judge Sterling lifted his gavel and brought it down hard against the sounding block. The sharp crack reverberated through the room, commanding immediate, absolute order. "The document submitted to this court today is not a last will and testament," Sterling announced, his voice booming over the sudden frantic murmurs erupting from the defense table. "It is the final definitive piece of physical evidence required by the federal government to execute multiple sweeping indictments." I remained seated at my table, watching the devastating chain reaction unfold. The true nature of my strategy was finally exposed. When I delivered the master ledger on the USB drive to the federal processing facility, the agents warned me that digital evidence, while powerful, often faced grueling challenges in court. They explained that high-priced defense lawyers routinely tied up digital forensics for years, arguing the data was corrupted, hacked, or manipulated by angry relatives. To secure a watertight immediate conviction for financial fraud and racketeering, the prosecution needed the perpetrators to commit an overt, undeniable criminal act directly tied to the stolen funds on the public record. I did not just sit quietly while my father's legal team spun their web of lies. I coordinated with the Securities and Exchange Commission to lay a perfect, inescapable trap. Submitting a forged document to a judge in a court of law is perjury. It is a severe felony offense. By arrogantly presenting the fabricated will, Richard Evans and his legal counsel officially entered a fraudulent instrument into the federal record. They knowingly committed a documented federal crime in an attempt to legitimize the transfer of $4.2 million. The act of submitting the fake will provide the precise legal mechanism the federal agencies required to prove intent to defraud and launder illicit capital. They willingly hammered the final nail into their own coffins. Sterling held the forged document aloft for the entire courtroom to see. This fabricated document legally proves that Mr. Richard Evans and Mr. Marcus Cole actively conspired to construct a false narrative in order to legitimize the transfer of illicit funds through a protected federal trust, Sterling stated, reading from a prepared summary. The submission of this document constitutes perjury, obstruction of justice, and attempted wire fraud. The lead FBI agent stepped forward from the formation. He unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. He approached Marcus, who was still pinned against the wall by the marshals. The distinct metallic click of the cuffs locking around Marcus's wrists sounded unnervingly loud in the quiet room. Madison let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream. Her influencer persona disintegrated completely. She watched in sheer horror as the federal agent systematically patted down her husband. The agent reached into Marcus's tailored suit jacket and retrieved his sleek, heavy metal corporate credit card, the very symbol of his wealth and unchecked power. The agent placed the card into a clear plastic evidence bag, sealing it tightly. The untouchable Wall Street titan was reduced to a handcuffed suspect, stripped of his financial armor in front of a live audience. At the defense table, the realization of his actions finally hit my father. Richard's knees buckled. He collapsed heavily into his chair, his hands trembling violently as he buried his face in his palms. The polished CEO was gone, replaced by a broken, terrified man facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Patricia burst into frantic, ugly sobs. She ignored the defense attorney standing frozen beside her and turned her tear-streaked face toward me. "Chloe, please," Patricia wailed, her voice echoing across the aisle. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them we were just confused about Clara's wishes. We are your family. Please do not let them take your father away." I looked at the woman who had watched me starve, who had conspired to freeze my bank accounts, and who had actively attempted to steal my inheritance to fund a criminal enterprise. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a profound, hollow emptiness where a daughter's love should have been. I did not answer her. I turned my attention back to the bench. Judge Sterling adjusted his robes and looked down at the defense table with an expression of profound disgust. He picked up his pen and began signing the official court order. This court formally rules the document presented by the defense to be entirely fraudulent and legally void. Sterling pronounced his voice ringing with finality. Furthermore, the court officially recognizes the irrevocable trust established by Clara Evans as valid and binding. Full legal inheritance rights and immediate access to the trust assets are hereby restored to the sole lawful beneficiary, Miss Chloe Evans. The gavel struck the block one final time. The ruling was absolute. The intricate web of lies, the cyber attacks, the frozen bank accounts, and the public smear campaigns all dissolved under the blinding light of federal law. My family believed their wealth and arrogance could overwrite reality. Instead, their own greed triggered their total, unmitigated destruction. The marshals began escorting Marcus toward the side exit, while the federal agents closed in on the defense table to detain my father. The legal war was over, but the personal fallout was just beginning. 1 month had passed since the heavy oak doors of Judge Sterling's courtroom sealed the ultimate fate of my family. The Atlantic Ocean stretched out before me, a vast expanse of deep blue, meeting the clear morning sky. I stood on the wraparound mahogany balcony of Aunt Clara's coastal estate, holding a ceramic mug of steaming black coffee. The ocean breeze carried the sharp scent of salt water and blooming jasmine, a stark, beautiful contrast to the biting, exhaust-choked wind of downtown Chicago. I wore a simple cashmere sweater and linen trousers. My frayed blazer and worn winter boots were gone, donated to a local shelter weeks ago. The silence of the sprawling property was profound. It was not the heavy, suffocating quiet of an empty, freezing apartment waiting for an eviction notice. It was the peaceful, unhurried stillness of a life finally secured and a war decisively won. The federal justice machine moved with terrifying efficiency once the perjury trap was sprung in that courtroom. Marcus Cole was denied bail as a designated flight risk. The Securities and Exchange Commission, working in rapid tandem with the Internal Revenue Service, invoked federal racketeering statutes to instantly freeze every single financial asset tied to his name. The sprawling suburban mansion, once overflowing with pastel balloons, catered delicacies, and wealthy, arrogant guests, now sat entirely empty. A stark white foreclosure notice was nailed to the custom front door by the bank. Madison watched her entire curated reality evaporate overnight. Stripped of her luxury vehicles, her designer wardrobe, and her husband's illicit credit lines, my sister faced a brutal, unforgiving awakening. She was forced by federal marshals to vacate the foreclosed property. With zero independent income and her social circle rapidly abandoning her to avoid implication, she had to relocate to a cramped one-bedroom unit in a deteriorating low-income housing complex on the far south side of the city. Her massive social media following vanished as the federal indictments became mainstream public knowledge. Brand sponsors dropped her contracts immediately. Industry peers shunned her. The digital audience she had so eagerly weaponized against me turned their collective ruthless outrage onto her comment sections. She was learning the hard way that an empire built on stolen money and manufactured lies eventually collapses under its own staggering weight. My cell phone rested on the wrought iron patio table beside me. The screen illuminated, vibrating softly against the metal surface. The caller identification displayed a local Chicago area code. It was Patricia. My mother had been calling me every single day for the past 3 weeks. She left frantic, weeping voicemails on my server, alternating between begging for financial salvation and demanding I instruct the federal prosecutors to drop the criminal charges. I ignored them all, allowing the digital logs to fill up with the tangible evidence of her mounting desperation. Today, however, I decided to break the silence. I picked up the device and tapped the green icon to accept the call. I did not offer a greeting. I simply raised the speaker to my ear and listened to the ragged, shallow breathing on the other end of the line. "Chloe, oh, thank God you finally answered." Patricia sobbed, her voice a fragile, hysterical mess devoid of its usual aristocratic polish. "Please, you have to help us. The federal prosecutors are refusing to negotiate any kind of plea deal. The judge set Richard's bail at $2 million. We have absolutely nothing left. The state seized our retirement accounts to pay restitution, and the defense legal fees are drowning us. Your father is suffering from severe chest pains in the holding facility. He is going to have a massive heart attack in that concrete cell. You have the trust money now. You won $4.2 million. You can easily afford to post his bail. Please, Chloe, I am begging you on my bare knees. We are family. You cannot just leave your own flesh and blood to die in a federal prison." I stood near the balcony railing, watching a lone seagull glide effortlessly over the crashing waves. I listened to the woman who birthed me attempt to leverage the concept of kinship to save the man who tried to destroy my entire future. I felt no urge to yell into the receiver. I felt no desire to inflict further emotional damage or gloat over her misery. The burning anger that fueled my survival during those freezing, desperate days in Chicago had burned itself out completely, leaving behind a cold, impenetrable clarity. Family is a word that requires mutual respect and protection to carry any actual meaning, I replied, my voice flat, clinical, and devoid of any lingering affection. Family is not a tool you utilize to force a daughter into signing away her legal rights under the guise of protecting her from debt. Family is not a weapon you deploy to frame someone for grand larceny. You and Richard made a calculated, deliberate choice to prioritize illicit wealth over my basic survival. You watched me face unjust eviction starvation and public humiliation, and you cheered for my downfall from a private dining room. You do not get to invoke the sacred privilege of kinship only after your criminal enterprise fails and you are facing the consequences of your own greed. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter taste ground me in the present moment. I will not authorize a single cent of Clara's money to facilitate the release of a documented felon, I stated, bringing the conversation to its inevitable conclusion. If Richard requires emergency medical attention, he can notify the prison warden. If you require adequate legal representation for the upcoming trials, I suggest you call the Public Defender Office, Mrs. Evans. I did not wait for her to formulate a response. I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. I opened the contact settings menu, selected Patricia's number, and engaged the permanent block feature. I repeated the exact same process for Madison, Richard, and every other extended relative who had remained complicit in their long-standing deception. The digital tether connecting me to that toxic lineage was severed forever. There would be no dramatic, tearful reconciliations in the future. There would be no tense holiday dinners or forced compromises. Some betrayals run too deep to be patched over with manufactured apologies. Forgiveness is a personal choice, but it is never a mandatory requirement for moving forward. I turned my back on the sweeping ocean view and stepped through the sliding glass doors into the spacious, sunlit living room of the estate. The interior was decorated in soft, neutral tones and natural wood, reflecting Clara's elegant, understated taste. I walked over to the solid oak dining table where the sleek silver laptop sat waiting. It was the exact same machine Madison had tried to rip from my hands during the party, the same device that served as the irrefutable physical proof of their guilt in front of the police. Now, it was simply my primary workstation. I opened the lid and woke the computer from its sleep mode. My secure banking portal was already open on the desktop display. The harsh red warning banners and asset freeze notifications from the state agencies were gone, wiped away by Judge Sterling's final ruling. In their place sat a clean, verified financial ledger. The available balance read exactly $4,200,000. The funds were cleared legitimate and legally recognized as mine. I minimized the banking window and launched my professional graphic design software. I loaded a blank canvas onto the screen, my fingers resting lightly over the trackpad. I no longer needed to accept grueling, low-paying freelance gigs just to keep the electricity running in a drafty apartment. I possessed the absolute financial freedom to choose my clients, to focus on creative projects that genuinely inspired me, and to produce art without the constant looming threat of starvation. A profound realization settled over me as I stared at the bright, empty digital canvas. For 30 years, I believed I was obligated to endure the emotional neglect and financial abuse inflicted by my parents simply because we shared a surname. I believed quiet endurance was a required component of familial duty. But the grueling high-stakes battle over Clara's estate taught me a vital, razor-sharp truth. Sometimes taking a blade and cutting off a rotting branch is not an act of cruelty. It is the only guaranteed method to ensure the rest of the tree survives the winter. Richard, Patricia, and Madison were the rot poisoning my roots, slowly draining my life to sustain their own illusions. By severing them completely, I stopped the decay. I picked up my digital stylus and drew a single bold line across the screen. The legal war was over. The toxic past was buried in a Chicago courtroom, and I was finally truly free to begin living my own life. I look out over the Atlantic one last time before settling into my work. The house holds a rich, fulfilling quiet. The ghost of Chicago, the freezing winds, the shattered door frames, they belong to a different lifetime. Clara left me more than wealth. She left me the blueprint for my own liberation. Sitting here watching the blank canvas on my monitor, I realized the most valuable things I extracted from that war were not stored on a silver flash drive or written in a probate file. They are the undeniable truths etched into my survival. First blood is a biological reality, not a binding contract. Society conditions us to believe that shared genetics mandate infinite forgiveness and perpetual sacrifice. It does not. When people who share your last name view you as a disposable asset, a stepping stone, or a convenient shield for their own illicit actions, they forfeit the title of family. True loyalty requires mutual respect and protection, not proximity and expectation. I learned to stop setting myself on fire to keep my abusers warm. Second, patience and silence are the most lethal weapons you can wield against arrogance. My father and my brother-in-law operated on brute intimidation and demanded immediate emotional reactions. They expected me to scream, to beg, to reveal my strategy in the heat of the moment. But the second you strip away your emotional response, you strip away their leverage. Letting your enemies believe they have won while you quietly gather undeniable evidence is not cowardice. It is tactical precision. You do not need to win a shouting match in a hallway if you are preparing to win the war in a federal courtroom. Finally, boundaries must be forged in steel, not drawn in sand. A boundary without a definitive consequence is merely a suggestion. Severing ties with toxic individuals requires a ruthless commitment to your own peace. There will always be fake olive branches, orchestrated guilt trips, and manufactured medical emergencies designed to drag you back into their chaos. Closing the door is only the first step. Throwing away the key is what guarantees your enduring freedom. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. I draw another line on the digital canvas, the strokes smooth and deliberate. The blank space ahead of me represents decades of unwritten, boundless possibilities. I survived the fire, and I emerged holding the deed to my own future. If my journey resonated with you, or if you have ever had to sever ties with the people who were supposed to protect you, I want to hear your voice. Drop a comment below and share your own experiences with setting hard boundaries. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and join our growing community here at Hazel Tells Stories. Remember, your peace is worth protecting, no matter the price.